The courtroom was silent. Every eye turned toward the three children standing side by side in front of the judge's bench. David, in his gray vest, stood tall like a soldier. Sophia, in her purple dress, clutched her hands together, trembling but defiant. Ethan, the youngest, had his chin lifted, eyes sharp as if daring the world to challenge him. Behind them, their mother, Angela Brown, sat stiff, her face pale but steady. The lawyer at her side whispered something urgent, but the children didn't flinch. They faced the judge directly, and then it happened. Judge Marcus Williams leaned forward, his gavel frozen mid-air. His eyes locked onto the three young faces. His jaw tightened, his hands trembled. For a moment, it seemed like he couldn't breathe. The courtroom murmured, sensing something unusual, but no one expected what came next. The judge's voice cracked, softer than anyone had ever heard from the man known for his cold authority. Who are these children?" David's voice was steady, carrying across the room like a blow. "We're here to defend our mother, and you should know exactly who we are." The words struck him like a knife. Because deep inside, Judge Marcus already knew. These weren't just children in his courtroom. They were his children, the ones he had abandoned 20 years ago. And now the truth he had buried was standing in front of him, alive, angry, and demanding justice. The tension in the courtroom thickened like smoke. The judge's gavel struck wood, sharp and desperate, as if he wanted to break the silence that was already suffocating him. "Order!" Marcus Williams barked, his voice back to its usual commanding tone. But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Across the aisle, Angela Brown lowered her eyes. She hadn't expected it to come to this. Not today. Not like this. For years she had fought alone, raising her three children in the shadow of a secret she thought she could bury forever. Yet here they were, standing in front of the one man who had caused her the deepest wound. Her lawyer, Michael Harris, leaned forward. "Your Honor, the children have a right to speak. They are here to defend their mother against false accusations of neglect. They demand to be heard." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Children testifying against the system, against a judge. It wasn't ordinary. It was scandal. Marcus tried to mask his shock. He cleared his throat. "Children," he said, fixing his eyes on David, the eldest. "This is a court of law, not a place for—" But David cut him off. "Not a place for what? For truth?" His small body shook, but his voice carried fire. "You sit there, pretending to be fair, pretending you don't know us. But we know you." A gasp ran through the courtroom. Even Harris blinked, stunned by David's bluntness. Sophia stepped closer to her brother, her eyes wide, glassy with tears she fought to control. "We're not here to play games," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We're here because our mother never stopped fighting for us. She worked 3 jobs. She skipped meals so we could eat. And now people say she neglected us? That's a lie." Ethan, the youngest, stood silent for a moment. Then, with the innocence of a child but the precision of a knife, he whispered, "She raised us alone because you left." The words echoed. They hung in the air like a verdict no gavel could erase. Marcus's face drained of color. He adjusted his glasses, trying to regain composure. "That's enough," he snapped, but the authority in his voice had cracked. Michael Harris seized the moment. He rose to his feet, smooth but firm. "Your Honor, these children are not speaking out of turn. They are speaking the truth. And the truth, no matter how inconvenient, is what this court exists for." Angela finally raised her head. Her eyes met Marcus's for the first time in years. There was no hatred in them, only exhaustion, and something that looked dangerously close to pity. "Why now?" Marcus whispered, so low only she could hear. "Because they deserve to know," Angela murmured back, "and because you can't hide forever." The judge's gavel struck again, harder this time, but the sound no longer commanded respect. It sounded hollow. David stepped forward, his chin high. You think you can silence us? You think your title, your robe will protect you? But we're not afraid of you anymore. Gasps filled the room. People leaned forward in their seats. They weren't just watching a case. They were watching a reckoning. Sophia's hands shook, but she found her courage in her brother's stance. We didn't come here to beg. We came here to show the world who you really are. Marcus's lips tightened. The courtroom wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a stage, and he was cornered under the harshest light. Every secret he had buried, every decision he had justified, every memory he had tried to erase, was unraveling in front of strangers, colleagues, and the press. Angela finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp as glass. For 20 years you walked away. You left me to carry everything. I said nothing, for the sake of the children. But now they're old enough to speak for themselves, and I will not stop them. Marcus's knuckles whitened around the gavel. His chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. The world he had built, his reputation, his career, his carefully constructed image, was cracking with every word spoken by those three small voices. Michael Harris adjusted his tie, turning toward the judge with a half-smile. Your Honor, you can strike their words from the record if you like, but you cannot strike them from memory. Everyone here has heard the truth, and no ruling can erase it. The room went still. For the first time in his career, Judge Marcus Williams wasn't in control of his courtroom. He was on trial, whether he admitted it or not. The air in the courtroom was suffocating. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across paper as though they knew they were witnessing a scandal that would tear the city apart. Every whisper from the audience seemed louder than the gavel that had just slammed down moments ago. Judge Marcus Williams leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed. But no amount of practiced control could hide the flicker of fear behind them. Angela Brown finally stood. She had been silent too long, and the weight of 2 decades pressed heavily on her chest. She smoothed her dress, lifted her chin, and faced the bench. You wanted order, Marcus? Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Then let's start with the truth. The name fell from her lips like a stone thrown into still water. Marcus. Not Your Honor, not Judge Williams, just Marcus, the man she had once known, the man who had walked away. A ripple of shock ran through the room. The children froze, watching their mother strip away the veil of formality. You abandoned us, Angela continued. 20 years ago, when I was barely 18, you left me with nothing but broken promises and 3 lives to raise on my own. You told me you weren't ready, that you had a career ahead of you, that we'd only drag you down. David's fists clenched at his sides. He had heard fragments of this story before, but never spoken so plainly, never in front of the man who caused it. Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. This is irrelevant, he muttered, but his voice wavered. We are here to discuss charges against you, not... Michael Harris, the lawyer, cut in sharply. Irrelevant? Your Honor, I disagree. The prosecution claims Angela Brown is an unfit mother. But if the truth is that she raised 3 children alone because you refused to take responsibility, then it is very relevant. The courtroom buzzed. Angela pulled a folder from her bag. She handed it to Harris, who opened it with deliberate slowness, as though savoring the moment. He held up old letters, their paper yellowed with time, words smudged but still legible. Exhibit A, Harris declared. Letters written by Marcus Williams to Angela Brown before he became the honorable judge we see today. Promises of support, affection, and commitment, followed by silence. Proof of abandonment. Gasps filled the room. Reporters craned their necks. Marcus's face turned pale. You kept those? He whispered, barely audible. Angela's eyes met his, unflinching. Every single one. David stepped forward, his voice raw. We used to ask her why our father never came. She always told us you were busy, that you had responsibilities. She protected you even when you didn't deserve it." Sophia's tears finally spilled over. She lied to protect us. But we're old enough now. We don't need lies. We want the truth. Ethan, with the blunt honesty only a child could wield, added, "You weren't busy. You just didn't want us." The courtroom held its breath. Marcus's mask cracked. He slammed the gavel down, but his voice betrayed him. "This line of questioning will cease." But Harris only smiled coldly. "You can silence the children, Your Honor, but you can't silence evidence, and you can't silence the past." Angela's voice softened, but the pain cut sharper than anger ever could. "Do you remember the night you left, Marcus? You told me I'd figure it out." I did. I figured out how to work 3 shifts. I figured out how to put food on the table. I figured out how to keep a roof over their heads. And I figured out how to live without you. The words hit harder than any verdict. Marcus gripped the bench until his knuckles whitened. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, not as a judge, but as a man stripped bare. The walls of authority he had built over decades were collapsing under the weight of truth. Harris placed the letters on the judge's desk. "We don't need your judgment today, Marcus. We need your confession. The world deserves to know why you abandoned them." For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. His chest rose and fell heavily. Then his eyes met the children's. David's fierce glare, Sophia's pleading tears, Ethan's accusing stare. They pierced through every defense he had left. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. "I was young, stupid, afraid. I thought I could run from responsibility and build a life without consequences." He paused, swallowing hard. But consequences always catch up. Angela closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had waited 20 years for those words, but they didn't heal. They only deepened the scar. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for legal arguments. It had become a confessional, a battlefield of memory and regret. And the audience, every juror, every reporter, every stranger, was now a witness to a secret too heavy to stay buried. The children stood silently, their young faces etched with pain beyond their years. They hadn't come for revenge, they had come for acknowledgement, for truth. But truth was only the beginning, and deep down, everyone in that room knew the real war had just begun. By the time court adjourned for the day, the story had already escaped the walls of the courthouse. Outside, dozens of reporters crowded the steps, microphones raised high, cameras flashing like lightning. The whispers that had started in the courtroom were now headlines plastered across screens and newspapers. Judge accused of abandoning family 20 years ago. Children confront father in courtroom shocker. Angela Brown's fight for justice exposes judge's dark past. The storm had begun. Angela shielded Sophia with her arm as they pushed through the sea of reporters. David walked ahead like a shield, his small frame tense, jaw clenched. Ethan clung to his mother's hand, wide-eyed at the chaos, though his defiance hadn't dimmed. "Angela, is it true he's the father?" "David, what did you mean when you said he abandoned you?" "Sophia, do you want your father back in your life?" Questions rained down like bullets. Michael Harris forced a path, his voice sharp. "No comments. No comments today." But the cameras captured everything. The fear in Angela's eyes, the children's determined faces, even the faint tremor in David's clenched fists. The images were too powerful to ignore, too human to be reduced to legal jargon. By evening, the footage had gone viral. News anchors replayed the confrontation again and again. David's fiery declaration, Sophia's trembling plea, Ethan's cutting accusation. Talk shows dissected every word. Social media lit up with hashtags. Abandoned 20 years, Judge Williams scandal, Angela Brownstrong. Some sympathized with Angela, others condemned Marcus. A few called it a family matter that never should have reached the court. But no one could look away. Inside his office, Marcus sat in the dark, the glow of his phone screen illuminating his weary face. His inbox was flooded. Messages from colleagues, political figures, even old friends. Some urged him to resign before the scandal destroyed the judiciary's credibility. Others offered hollow words of support. But none of them mattered. What mattered were the headlines. What mattered was the look in his children's eyes. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand shaking. For decades he had controlled every narrative, every case, every perception. Now, for the first time, he was the story. Angela, meanwhile, sat at the kitchen table in their small apartment, bills scattered across the counter. The children slept fitfully in the next room, their dreams haunted by the day's events. She stared at the flickering TV. Every channel replayed her past, dissecting her choices, questioning her motives. Was she using her children to destroy a powerful man? Was this revenge dressed as justice? Her stomach knotted. She hadn't asked for this storm. All she had wanted was to protect her children from false accusations. But now the world had dragged their pain into the spotlight. Michael Harris called late that night. His tone was firm, almost urgent. "Angela, listen to me. This is bigger than us now. The press won't stop. The prosecution will spin this against you. They'll say you're staging drama to cover your faults. We need to stay ahead of this." Angela closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing heavy on her. "I didn't want a war, Michael. I just wanted the truth." "Truth," Harris said, "is the most dangerous weapon. Once it's out, you can't control where it lands." Across town, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the State Ethics Committee. "We will be reviewing your case. Effective immediately, you are under investigation." He gripped the phone so tightly it almost cracked. His empire was collapsing piece by piece, and the hands tearing it apart were the same ones he had abandoned 2 decades ago. The next morning, the courthouse steps were even more crowded. Protesters held signs. "Stand with Angela. Children deserve justice. Resign now, Williams." David looked at the signs, his young face hardening. "They believe us," he whispered to Sophia. But Sophia only shook her head. "Believing isn't enough. What if he finds a way to win anyway?" Ethan tugged at Angela's hand. "Mom, will he take us away from you?" Angela knelt, holding him close. "No, baby, not now, not ever." Yet doubt gnawed at her. The system Marcus had served for years was the same one that now held her family's fate, and Marcus still had allies, still had power. As cameras flashed again and reporters shouted questions, Angela realized the courtroom battle was only one part of the fight. The bigger war was outside, in the streets, on the screens, in the hearts of people who had already chosen sides. And the storm was only getting stronger. By the 4th day of hearings, the case was no longer just a legal dispute. It had become a war of sides. Outside the courthouse, the crowd split down the middle. On one side, protesters held posters of Angela and her children, their voices rising in chants. "Justice for the Browns! Children deserve better!" On the other, a smaller but determined group defended Marcus. They waved banners that read, "Respect the court," and "Stop exploiting children." Police formed a barricade between the two groups, but the tension was undeniable. The city itself seemed to have taken sides. Angela stood by the window of the courthouse waiting room, watching the chaos outside. Her stomach tightened. She never wanted her children to become symbols. They were just kids, her kids. But now, their faces were plastered on posters and social media feeds. Michael Harris entered, carrying a thick folder. "Good news and bad news," he said flatly. Angela turned. "Start with the bad," he sighed. The prosecution's building a narrative that you've manipulated the children. They're saying this entire confrontation was staged for sympathy to cover up your so-called neglect. Angela's face paled. That's a lie. I know, but lies spread faster than truth, Harris said. The good news? We've got allies, journalists who believe you, child welfare advocates, even a few former colleagues of Marcus who are ready to speak on record about his less than honorable past. Angela blinked. Former colleagues? Harris's lips curved into a grim smile. Enemies, Angela. Marcus made plenty of them climbing the ladder, and enemies never forget. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat in his office, the blinds drawn. His phone buzzed nonstop, calls from senators, judges, old law partners. Some offered support, others distanced themselves, worried their own reputations would burn alongside his. His longtime friend, Judge Harold Kent, stormed into the room without knocking. A tall man with a booming voice, Kent had stood by Marcus through countless trials. "What the hell is happening, Marcus?" Kent demanded. "You're supposed to be the pillar of this court, and now half the country thinks you're a fraud." Marcus rubbed his temples. "Do you think I planned this? Do you think I wanted them here?" Kent leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I don't care what you did 20 years ago. What matters is perception. And right now, perception is killing you. You need to shut this down. Fast." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How? They're everywhere. The press, the protesters, the damn internet." Kent's eyes narrowed. "Then discredit them. Paint Angela as unstable. Prove she's unfit. If you don't, you'll lose everything. Your seat, your legacy, your career. And believe me, no one will remember the truth. They'll only remember the scandal." Marcus stared at him, a storm brewing in his chest. Allies like Kent were dangerous. They didn't care about right or wrong. They cared about survival. Back at Angela's apartment, the children huddled around the TV. David scrolled through articles on his phone, his young face twisted in anger. "They're calling us liars," he muttered. "They're saying Mom made us do this, that we're just puppets." Sophia hugged her knees. "Maybe we shouldn't have spoken. Maybe it made things worse." "No," David said firmly. "We did the right thing. He's the one who should be ashamed, not us." Ethan piped up, his small voice steady. "If we stay quiet, he wins. If we speak, maybe we hurt. But at least the world knows." Angela appeared in the doorway, her heart aching at the sight of them carrying burdens far too heavy for their age. She crossed the room, pulling them close. "Listen to me," she whispered. "Whatever they say out there doesn't matter. What matters is us, the truth we carry. No headline can take that away." But deep down, Angela knew headlines had power, and Marcus still had allies willing to fight dirtier than she ever could. The next day in court, the shift was immediate. The prosecution introduced a witness, an old neighbor from years ago, who claimed Angela had left the children alone at night while she worked late shifts. The implication was clear: neglect. Angela's face burned with shame. She wanted to scream, to explain she had no choice, that survival demanded sacrifice. But Harris held her back, whispering, "Stay calm. We'll dismantle this." David's fists tightened. "She only did that because he wasn't there," he whispered to Sophia. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "They're twisting everything." From the bench, Marcus's face remained impassive, but inside, his chest clenched. He knew the truth. Angela had been forced to do what she did because of him. Yet he sat there, bound by his own silence, watching her be crucified for his choices. The line between allies and enemies was blurring. Every move created new ones. Every revelation shifted the balance. And as the courtroom drama deepened, one thing became clear. The war was no longer about custody, neglect, or even abandonment. It was about survival, and survival demanded sacrifices. The fifth week of the trial felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a battlefield. Every day brought a new ambush, a new revelation, another blow designed to push someone past their breaking point. Angela sat in the witness chair, her palms damp against the wood. Across from her, the prosecutor's eyes glittered like a hawk's. "You claim Judge Marcus abandoned you and the children," the lawyer pressed, his tone sharp. "Yet you willingly remained silent for years. Why speak now, when the timing so conveniently aligns with his promotion and the national spotlight?" The words sliced like knives. Angela's throat tightened. Silence had once been her shield, survival through invisibility. But now, silence was being painted as complicity. "I stayed quiet because I had no choice," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I wanted to protect my children from more pain, but you cannot bury truth forever. Eventually, it claws its way to the surface." The courtroom murmured. Some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened with doubt. Marcus shifted in his chair. Each time Angela spoke, guilt gnawed at him like acid. Her words weren't lies. He had left them behind, chasing ambition while she struggled alone. But to admit that now would mean obliteration. His lawyer leaned over. "Stay composed. Don't flinch. If you crack, we lose everything." But Marcus was already cracking. Inside, he could feel it, tiny fissures widening with each testimony. The children weren't spared either. David was called to the stand. At just 14, he looked small against the vast courtroom, his sneakers barely touching the floor. The prosecutor leaned forward. "David, you've accused your father of abandoning you, but records show he sent financial support. Isn't it true you received monthly transfers?" David's jaw clenched. "Money isn't a father." Laughter rippled faintly through the gallery before the judge banged the gavel. David's eyes burned, his voice rising. "He wasn't there when Mom was sick. He wasn't there when we had nothing to eat. He wasn't there when Ethan cried himself to sleep. Money doesn't tuck you in at night. Money doesn't hug you when you're scared." His voice cracked, breaking into sobs. Angela buried her face in her hands, torn between pride and heartbreak. Marcus looked down at the table, unable to meet his son's eyes. That raw truth pierced deeper than any accusation. That night, in the dim glow of a motel room, Angela finally broke. She curled on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. Harris paced the room, throwing papers onto the desk. "They're going to drag every mistake you ever made into the light," he muttered. "Every late bill, every absence, every moment of struggle. They'll weaponize it." Angela's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe I should stop fighting." Harris froze. "Don't you dare." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Look at them, Michael. The kids are exhausted. They're reliving every nightmare we tried to bury. And Marcus, he'll never admit the truth. He'll destroy me before he lets go." Harris softened, his anger shifting to compassion. He sat beside her. "Angela, you're not just fighting for you. You're fighting so your children don't grow up believing silence is their only option. If you stop now, he wins. And worse, they'll think he was right." Angela pressed her palms to her eyes, swallowing sobs. "I don't know how much more I can take." "Then lean on me," Harris said quietly. "I've carried cases darker than this. I'll carry you too if I have to." Meanwhile, Marcus reached his own breaking point. Alone in his office, he poured a glass of bourbon, staring at the city skyline. His reflection in the window looked hollow, aged decades in weeks. The door creaked open. Judge Kent entered again, his voice low. "You're losing control, Marcus. The kid's testimony damn near broke the jury, and Angela, she's turning public opinion into a tidal wave." Marcus gritted his teeth. "What do you want me to do? Admit I failed? That I wasn't the man they thought I was?" Kent's eyes were cold. "Better a confession than a ruinous scandal. Decide which you can survive." Marcus slammed the glass onto the desk, shards scattering. "Survival? You think this is about survival? My name, my career, my legacy, that's all I have left. If I fall as the man I built, not as the coward they're painting me to be." Kent studied him a long moment. then said quietly, "Cowardice isn't admitting failure, Marcus. Cowardice is watching your children drown while you cling to your throne." For the first time, Marcus's facade cracked. His hands trembled. His reflection in the glass blurred with tears he hadn't allowed himself in years. By the next morning, headlines screamed, "The Brown children speak out, courtroom in tears. Judge Marcus silent as sun breaks down." The nation was no longer just watching. It was judging, and the weight of that judgment was crushing everyone involved. Allies were strained, enemies emboldened, and in the eye of the storm, each heart carried a private fracture. The case was no longer about law. It was about how much pain a family could endure before it shattered completely. And one thing was certain: the breaking points had been reached. The case no longer belonged to the courtroom. It had spilled out into every home, every office, every cafe where a television played or a phone screen lit up. Major news outlets ran breaking updates. Social media platforms buzzed with live reactions. The story of a judge, secretly being the father of the very children standing before him, was too sensational, too raw to ignore. CNN called it "the trial of blood and betrayal." The New York Times ran an editorial, "Justice meets family when the bench isn't neutral." TikTok clips of David's fiery speech defending his mother went viral, accumulating millions of views within hours. Across the world, strangers debated late into the night. Some saw Marcus as a hypocrite, a man who had hidden behind the law while abandoning his own family. Others insisted he deserved compassion, that men could change after decades. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the crowd swelled into the hundreds. Protesters carried signs: "Justice for Angela," "Deadbeat Dad on the bench," "Blood before the law." But not everyone was against Marcus. A smaller group chanted, "Let him judge. Family drama is not equal to law drama." The division mirrored the chaos inside Marcus himself. Angela sat in her living room that night, blinds shut, her phone vibrating nonstop. She refused every interview request. Ethan scrolled through Twitter, fury boiling inside him. "Look at this," he said, shoving the phone toward his siblings. "Some people think he's a hero. They're calling him the victim." David snatched the phone, jaw tightening. "Let them talk. The truth's coming." Sophia, quieter, hugged her knees. "But what if the truth isn't enough? What if people choose the story they like, not what really happened?" Angela looked at her children, her heart breaking. They were old enough to understand how cruel the world could be. She had kept them safe for so long, but now the world was tearing at their wounds. Marcus, too, was watching the storm unfold. His private chambers felt smaller every night. The television showed his face on repeat, every channel dissecting his past. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, the governor's office called again. They want a statement. They're worried this could undermine the entire judiciary." Marcus pressed his temples. "Tell them I'll release something tomorrow." But what could he possibly say? How could a few sentences undo 20 years of silence? He poured himself a glass of scotch, stared at the framed diplomas on his wall. They once represented his triumph. Now they mocked him. His empire of law was collapsing under the weight of his personal sin. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the urge to call someone, not a lawyer, not a politician. He wanted to hear Angela's voice. He wanted to explain. But his pride strangled him. Instead, he sat in silence, haunted by the chants outside the courthouse. By the end of the week, the case had turned global. BBC, Al Jazeera, and even tabloids in Europe splashed headlines about "the judge who judged his own blood." Foreign commentators dissected America's obsession with scandal. "This is no longer a simple custody or support case," one analyst said. "It's a referendum on morality in positions of power." In Vietnam, in Brazil, in South Africa, people streamed the trial online. their comments filling chat rooms with anger, pity, and curiosity. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and none of them were quiet about it. The world was watching, and with every headline, the stakes rose higher. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. No one looked at the case as routine anymore. Every word spoken was recorded, replayed, and dissected by millions. Angela adjusted her scarf as cameras flashed. David squared his shoulders like a soldier going to war. Sophia whispered a silent prayer. Ethan clenched his fists. And Marcus? Marcus lowered his gavel, his hands visibly shaking. This was no longer just about law. It was about legacy. And the entire world waited to see which man Marcus Williams truly was, the honorable judge or the cowardly father. The courthouse was suffocating with tension. Every seat filled, reporters shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing like lightning storms. The trial had gone far beyond local drama. It had become a global spectacle. Marcus Williams, usually a pillar of composure, looked aged under the harsh courtroom lights. His gavel rested in front of him, but he hadn't touched it. His hand trembled slightly. Across the aisle sat Angela, her children beside her, David with fire in his eyes, Ethan restless with suppressed rage, Sophia pale but determined. They weren't just plaintiffs anymore. They were survivors carrying the weight of 20 years. The room fell into silence when the clerk announced, "All rise." But no one needed to be told. Every heart rose with the moment. This was no ordinary hearing. This was the reckoning of a man who had abandoned blood, yet cloaked himself in justice. Angela's lawyer stood first. Calm but piercing, she turned toward the bench. "Your Honor," she began, her tone deliberately sharp on the title, "we are not here simply to argue over money or support. We are here because these children, your children, have lived with the scars of abandonment, and now the world sees it. No robe, no gavel, no courtroom wall can hide that truth anymore." Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras zoomed in on Marcus's face. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Angela's lawyer gestured toward the siblings. "David, would you stand?" David rose, voice steady. "When I was 8, I watched my mom cry herself to sleep, wondering how we'd pay rent. She never told me why, but I knew. She was alone. You left her alone. You left us alone." Ethan followed, fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to act like some great man of law. You're just a coward who ran away. Do you know what it's like to grow up hating a man you've never met? To feel like you're not good enough because your father never wanted you?" Sophia's turn came last. She rose quietly, her voice trembling yet cutting deeper than anger. "All these years, I prayed maybe you had a reason, that maybe one day you'd knock on our door, but you never did. You sentenced us before we even had a chance." The courtroom was still, not even the sound of typing from court reporters. The weight of 20 years pressed against Marcus's chest. For a long moment he stayed silent. The world held its breath. Then Marcus slowly stood, not as a judge, but as a man stripped bare. His voice cracked as he began, "I have judged others my entire life. I thought justice meant rules, order, punishment. But I see now. Justice without compassion is hollow." He turned, eyes locking onto Angela first. "Angela, I failed you. I was young, ambitious, and a coward. I told myself leaving was the only way to protect my future, but all I did was destroy yours." Then to the children. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. "David, Ethan, Sophia, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you must know this. I have lived every day with a shadow, and that shadow was you. Every time I passed judgment, I wondered what kind of man I had become. And today, I finally see the answer. I am guilty." Angela's hand trembled on her lap. Tears welled in her eyes, not of reconciliation, but of long-awaited acknowledgement. The room buzzed. The lawyer leaned in, seizing the moment. Then let this court recognize what you just admitted, Judge Williams. Guilt. Not in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of humanity. You abandoned your duty as a father, and no amount of legal power can erase that. The judge's bench no longer shielded Marcus. He removed his robe slowly, folded it, and placed it on the desk. A symbolic act seen live around the world. I cannot continue this trial, he said. It is no longer mine to preside over. Today, I step down. Shockwaves rippled through the courtroom. Reporters rushed to file updates. Protesters outside roared in triumph. The once untouchable judge had fallen by his own admission. Angela closed her eyes, whispering to herself. Not victory, not satisfaction, just release. 20 years of silence broken at last. The court adjourned in chaos. Marcus walked out of the chamber without his robe, his figure smaller than ever. Cameras followed him, but he no longer raised his chin. Angela held her children close. For the first time in years, their burden felt lighter. David placed an arm around his mother. Ethan exhaled deeply, like air rushing from a balloon finally untied. Sophia whispered, "It's over." But the world's eyes didn't leave them. Headlines blasted instantly. Judge resigns in tearful confession. Family abandonment exposed. The reckoning of Marcus Williams. Children's testimonies break the silence of 2 decades. This was no longer just their story. It had become a lesson echoed globally, that power cannot erase the past, and truth once spoken reshapes everything. Angela stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight. She tightened her grip on her children's hands. The crowd erupted, cameras flashing. But for her, all that mattered was this. They were free. Marcus, somewhere behind her, walked alone into the shadows of his choices. The final reckoning had come, and justice, true justice, belonged to those who had been voiceless for too long. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, but the echoes of that final gavel still lingered in everyone's minds. The verdict had been read. The truth was no longer a secret whispered in corners. It was now part of the public record, printed in headlines, replayed on evening news, dissected in podcasts and talk shows. Marcus sat alone in his chambers, tie loosened, the weight of 20 years pressing against his chest. He had stood in judgment of countless men, but never of himself. Tonight he was no judge, only a man who had to live with the choices of his youth. He looked at the photo the press had snapped of Angela walking hand in hand with the children. She looked stronger, freer, as if laying bare the truth had unchained her. Angela, at home, tucked Ethan into bed. He clung to her hand. "Will he come back, Mom?" he whispered. She paused, unsure if her son was asking about Marcus or the storm that had uprooted their lives. She kissed his forehead. "We'll be okay. No matter what." But in the quiet, she wondered if she believed her own words. David sat by the window, staring at the skyline lit with flashing news helicopters. He felt older than his years. The day had taken his anger, his pride, and replaced them with something heavier. Responsibility. He wasn't sure if he hated Marcus anymore. Hate was easy. What came next wasn't. Sophia wrote in her journal, words tumbling out. "Maybe forgiveness isn't about letting him in. Maybe it's about letting us breathe." She closed it tight, a secret just for her. And Marcus? He didn't know if the children would ever forgive him. But tomorrow would come. The world would keep watching. And perhaps one day, the gavel's echo would fade into something softer, not judgment, not punishment, but the fragile possibility of redemption. The story wasn't over. It was only changing hands.